The number of COVID-19 cases across Australia has surpassed 250. Another 8 people have been diagnosed this morning in Victoria, bringing the state's total there to 57. New South Wales has the most cases of coronavirus, standing at 112. Queensland has 46 cases after another 11 people were diagnosed yesterday. South Australia has 19 infections and WA has 17 after both states recorded 3 new cases each. New measures to try and stop the spread of coronavirus will be considered by senior government figures today as other countries take further steps to protect their citizens. Spain, Italy and France are imposing lockdowns, while New Zealand is forcing those entering the country to self-isolate for 14 days. The Prime Minister Scott Morrison is meeting with state and territory leaders and will also hold talks with senior federal government ministers about Australia's response to coronavirus. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by political reporter Stephanie Boris through the meetings that are being held today.
So there's a new national cabinet that's been established. It includes the Prime Minister and all state and territory leaders. They're meeting via a phone hookup this morning, and the idea behind this meeting, one will be held every week, is to try and ensure there's a national and coordinated response to coronavirus. Also happening today, the Prime Minister is talking with senior government figures with the National Security Committee of Cabinet meeting too. A number of things to be discussed in those 2 meetings today, one of which is coming into place tomorrow, that recommendation that mass events of more than 500 people no longer go ahead if they're non-essential. So things such as sporting events or big music concerts, they are being recommended not to proceed from tomorrow. Also, no doubt in discussion today is what Australia does when it comes to travel restrictions, because we've seen New Zealand announce that they will require anyone coming into their country to self-isolate for 14 days. The thinking behind that, of course, is to try and stop the spread of coronavirus in New Zealand.
Now, Stephanie, as you mentioned there, that advice regarding non-essential large gatherings of more than 500 people to come into place tomorrow. But at this stage, schools are not being included. Is that correct?
That is correct. So this recommendation is just to non-essential mass gatherings. It does not include schools, public transport, large office buildings or universities. But we have seen overseas a number of countries shut down schools. Here, even in Australia, a handful of schools have closed when there's been a positive case of coronavirus with a student or teacher. So there have been questions about what happens in Australia. Is there the prospect of primary and secondary schools closing down? We know that there are school holidays coming up in April, a question around whether to extend school holidays. The Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, says all options are being considered, but he has pointed out that they don't want to close schools too soon, considering this virus could be around for months.
We are rightly keeping all options on the table, whether it's in relation to travel, whether it's in relation to schools. The schools question will be very much guided by the medical advice. One of the things that they have talked about is not moving too early on something like that because of the balance that many children, and I understand one of the leading state education authorities in New South Wales pointed out the risk of children being with grandparents, of taking parents out of the workforce who might be in the health and medical sector, disrupting supply chains. So maintaining the structure of society.
Greg Hunt there. Now, Stephanie, we are increasingly seeing more countries around the world imposing lockdowns on their citizens and residents to try and stop the spread of coronavirus. Is there any indication at this stage as to whether that might happen here in Australia?
Well, we have seen lockdowns, of course, in Italy. A number of those images have been beamed across the world, and Spain and France are following suit as well. In South Korea, they locked down certain provinces. Here in Australia, the Chief Medical Officer says there's no need for that yet because the number of cases in Australia is relatively low. However, Brendan Murphy this morning said it is a possible option if the cases do continue to rise.
One of the things we know about outbreaks of infections is that they can affect one part of a country, not another.
So you could lock down part of Sydney, but not the whole country?
You potentially you could. I mean, look, the Koreans did that for 2 provinces very successfully, locked them down. So everything is up for consideration.
Brendan Murphy there. Now, Stephanie, there's been some confusion around advice relating to coronavirus. So what's the latest information we have?
You're right there. It depends on who you listen to and where you're getting your advice from as to exactly what we should all be doing, not only just to keep well, but what to do if you are feeling unwell. The federal government today is rolling out a national public health campaign. $30 million is being pumped into this. The understanding is that the public health campaign will continue to change in the days and weeks ahead as the advice changes as well, depending on how many cases there are in Australia. Now, there have been questions around whether we should shake hands or not. In some states, the advice is not to. But today from the Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, he said if you've been overseas, do not shake hands on return to Australia. Do try and introduce some of that social distancing, so standing at least a metre away from people. But if you haven't been overseas and you're feeling well, he says at the moment you can still go ahead and shake hands, but he has prefaced that by saying that advice is expected to change. What about the movies or the gym? Brendan Murphy with both of those events and those areas saying that you can still go to the gym, but make sure you wash your hands before, during and after. The same with the movies. But if you're over 70, Brendan Murphy says that you should be more cautious. And of course, if you've got a chronic illness, you should be more cautious too. Now, we have seen a lot of panic buying across Australia. Those images of shopping shelves absolutely bare. Interesting, in Victoria, advice was given to Victorians that they should actually buy up for 2 weeks' worth of food. That question was put to the Chief Medical Officer today. He said that that's not necessary yet, but of course that could change depending on how many cases are in Australia. And all of this confusion, the changing messages have been raised by Labor's health spokesperson, Chris Bowen. He's also urged for calm amongst people and to remember to be kind to each other.
This is a time to look out for each other. Of course, people will stock up on certain things that they're concerned about running out on, and that's important even if they're not concerned, because there is a shortage. So if people see something, they're going to grab it, just quite rationally and sensibly. But I know the major supermarkets have limits on purchasing. That's very sensible. But let's look out for each other. Let's not panic buy. Let's be prudent. Let's be careful.
Now, we are expecting to hear further details about Australia's coronavirus response when the Prime Minister steps up later today.